Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Eugene Turk. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Align, and I want to welcome you to our monthly coach webinar for February 2021. I hope that everybody is doing well and staying healthy, staying warm. This morning, we are thrilled to have UK-based business coach, Essex-based business coach Peter Boolkah with a presentation on unlocking your team's full potential with goal-based performance management. For those of you who are not familiar with Peter, he is better known as the transition guy for helping hundreds of entrepreneurs attain meaningful change and growth in both their professional and personal lives. Peter has been coaching since 2005 and has received more than 30 major coaching awards during that time. He is a certified scaling up coach, as well as a member of the Action Coach Hall of Fame. Peter's style is very direct, no nonsense, and he has worked with hundreds of companies, including those who have used the Align software to successfully grow, scale, and ultimately sell their businesses. When he isn't helping companies and entrepreneurs grow and achieve their goals, he is an avid photographer whose work, I must say, is quite stunning. I've seen it. Anyway, Peter, it's always great to see you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Eugene.
Before we begin, as always, just one administrative matter. We want this to be as educational and informational for all of you as possible. Peter is going to keep this very conversational this morning. And so if you have a question at any time or a comment about some of the content that Peter is providing, please feel free to use the chat feature to pose that question, and we will direct them to Peter during the conversation, as well as we'll leave some time at the end for questions as well. Again, thank you everybody for attending this Align Coach webinar. And I will now turn the microphone over to Peter.
Thank you, Eugene. And when we were talking about the topic, thanks for having me, but when we were talking about the topic around goal-based sort of management, I thought it was really timely we take that topic on board, especially with the pandemic. And if you take the pandemic, and actually the first time we've seen the globe locked down, it's been the biggest fundamental shift in the way that we work in a generation, probably about 3 or 4 generations. The way that it's literally the biggest move from, I would say, watching people work to having to redefine how we run our business. And what's really interesting is that most businesses, they hire people, but they don't necessarily think the end in mind. They don't necessarily think what they want that role to look like. They don't necessarily think about what the outcomes of that role is. The majority of people, believe it or not, just hire people to be busy and to take work on that needs to be done without thinking, okay, is there a better way of doing it? Should I check in with that person? It's remarkable that in an office environment, how few conversations actually happen with employees. People say that we're talking all the time, but there's a big difference between talking and actually moving the dial and helping people become better. And all of a sudden, when we've had lockdown and people had to remote work, companies started to panic because they could no longer see their employees. And that was one of the biggest reasons why remote working really didn't take off in the UK, because of the whole lack of trust, because actually people that are in a leadership position in the business didn't have the right metrics in place, didn't have the right definition of what they wanted to achieve, therefore didn't trust their people to remote work. So we've had to go back to the drawing board in many respects and start to think, darn, let's get some goals down. Actually, let's get some tangible goals. And it's not so okay saying activities, what activities are you going to be doing? It's been a shift from activities to outcomes. Because you think about it, most traditional businesses will say, okay, your working hours, we want to see you in the office at 8 in the morning. We're going to don't see what a person does. You don't see how a person dresses. You don't exactly know what time they start. So how do you measure them? You've got to measure them on outcomes. And that's been the interesting shift, measuring people on actual outcomes and defining what those outcomes actually look like. So that's the first one. Companies are to define what outcomes they want to see. And because we're remote working, the traditional way of working has in many respects been thrown out the window. So we've had to look at new technologies, different ways of working. And what's quite fascinating is ways that we used to work probably were nowhere near as efficient as we would have liked to have believed. In fact, they were very inefficient as people go out there now and they look for better ways of getting the job done. So it's really driven innovation through organizations. And also what it's done is forced us to look at the employee themselves and actually say, well, instead of doing a sort of job description, how you are going to do the job, because that's now been thrown out the window, what we start looking at is actually what I do with my clients. So we look at the 10 conditions of success. We look at what does winning look like? Because ultimately, when you hire somebody, you don't hire them to say, okay, do you know what? Let me watch you fail. Because if they're failing, we're failing. So what does success really look like? What does that winning formula look like? And if we can actually identify and take the time out, and by the way, the reason we choose 10 is because it's damn hard. If you can actually choose 10 conditions of success for a role, then you've clearly thought out that role. You really know what winning looks like. And the important thing is once you've got that level of clarity around that role, you can start looking at other things that people look at like skill gaps and things like that, because actually you know what skills are needed to help that person win. So that's first and foremost. You've got to look at the role. And then you've got to say to yourself now, how do I engage with people? And this is a big, big change. Because a lot of people say to me, okay, well, engagement has been different. Of course it has. When you're in the office, people are under that false illusion, yeah, we talk all the time. No, you have passing conversations. And a lot of people are in denial because they believe those passing conversations are quality conversations. Well, no, they're not. They just happen to be conversations of convenience because somebody crosses your pathway or something. As soon as you go remote, you've got to be a lot more purposeful with what you are doing. You've got to be a lot more purposeful about the conversations you have, because now you have to truly schedule in those conversations. And that's the important thing. Remote working forces you to schedule time in, where before it wasn't. It was, let me grab you for 5 minutes and pull that person. And at the time, probably disrupt them from their working environment and actually what they were focusing on. So I mean, a few questions that clients have asked me over a period of time when it comes to goal setting. How aggressive should goal targets be to maximize performance? That's a great question. Your goals should always be aggressive in terms of where do you want to take the business. One of the big mistakes businesses make is they look at their people and they set their goals based on the current ability of their workforce, not the stretch goal of where they want to take the business. Because at the end of the day, they're measuring it by where it is. Whereas if you take the really high growth businesses out there, they'll set their aggressive goals and then they'll look at their team and see whether they've got a team that's capable of actually delivering those goals. There's a big difference between the two. Now then you can look at, well, can we train the person? Does that person actually have the talent to step up to the next level? Because I see so many businesses being held back by people, not because they're bad people, but because they were yesterday's people. And I'm seeing that more and more in organizations right now. Because we've now made a huge shift where we've shifted to this remote working and we've become extremely technology centric. People that you would never get on video conferencing. And I had clients that wouldn't jump on a video call with me for years and years and years. And would always say, no, I'd rather come and see you. They'd rather drive an hour and a half each way just to spend time with me. As soon as we had the lockdown, they had no choice but to switch overnight. Now they've got used to the technology, they won't switch back. but you've got other people that haven't embraced technology, perhaps as enthusiastically. And the challenge you've got is if you're moving forward and you've got people holding you back, you've got to ask yourself, you've got to be honest and say, okay, is it going to change? And I love the saying, change a person or change a person. And a lot of my clients have had to change the people because actually they're not going to be good enough or prepared enough to go on that next stage of the journey. So never limit your goals by the people you have in your organization today. Set your goals and then find the people that will help you achieve those goals. Now, one of the biggest challenges when you're setting goals is obviously having a mechanism to communicate those goals. And I can't begin to tell you the amount of times I've seen people set goals, but not communicate them to the entire business. So it's like they're expecting the people in the business to just sort of guess what the goals are and magically achieve them for the business. You've got to have a system in place that's absolutely visible, where everyone can see them, but most importantly, everybody can see progress of the goals. See, people say to me, we've had a bad quarter. Yeah, it's not been a good quarter. And I say to them, rubbish. You've had a shocking 13 weeks. And actually, more importantly, you've had a shocking 65 days. A bad quarter, you could then go as far as say 8 hours a day, you really have had a stinker. Because we've not actually been driving the goals forward. Goals should be driven forward on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, and where appropriate, hourly basis. Goals should be driven. They shouldn't just be allowed to happen off their own volition. That's not pushing forward. That's just praying and hoping you'll get there. And then to have a system in place, you've got to have a good management system in place. Now, one of the managements, okay, Eugene, you know that I use Align. And here's the word, Align. I mean, it's a cute name for that system. But you think about it, what does it fundamentally do? It aligns people towards a goal. It aligns an organization towards a goal. Surely that's got to be the goal of every organization. Get everybody moving in that one direction, getting everybody pulling together. And not what I see in so many businesses where people are creating their own little sort of castles and actually pulling apart. Because when you've got all people within organizations pulling apart, it takes forever to get to where you need to be. So bear that in mind. I know Jason just put into the chat, will the rest of the webinar, I'll be talking without visual aids. Absolutely. I hate visual aids. One of the things I have a challenge with is that when you're speaking with visual aids, you don't necessarily engage with the audience today. I want to engage with you and actually make it as interactive as possible. So as you get questions, please throw them at me. But yeah, make sure you've got a really strong management system where everyone is working towards the goals.
Peter,
Now, another question I get asked.
Peter, can I ask a quick question? So you're talking about how aggressive should your goals be? Where is that fine line between setting an aggressive goal and one that is sort of unreasonable or unattainable that might demoralize your team because they're not able to achieve it? It's one thing to set aggressive goals, but then it's also another thing to have employees who quarter over quarter aren't hitting those goals, and so therefore it may demoralize the organization and the workforce.
Fantastic question. What would the answer be if you asked Elon Musk that question?
Every goal is achievable.
Absolutely. The only thing that would stop Elon Musk achieving that goal is actually having the right team in place. One thing that you've got to give that man credit, and everyone says, well, he burns through people at quite a high rate. If people can no longer go on the journey, he switches them out for the next level player. It's no different to a sports team. A sports team goes up a division, not all players stick with that sports team. They have to let some of the players go. They have to bring in new players that can play at a higher level. It's no different with businesses. All that those companies do, all the high growth businesses, they're looking for talent all the time. They're looking at that next level talent that can propel the company on its next stage of the journey. Whereas you've got other businesses that are actually looking at people and saying, okay, we won't go here because it's going to upset the team. Therefore, they artificially restrain the potential of the business. So at the end of the day, it depends on where you want to take the business. If you truly are ambitious and you want to grow your business, then you've got to set those lofty goals and you've got to give your team the opportunity to step up and go on that journey. But if they're not able to do that, sometimes you've got to be in a position where you let good people go. See, most people will deal with the bad performers, the troublemakers. But sometimes we've got to let good people go that are not troublemakers. They're not bad people. They're just not right for the next stage of the journey. Does that clarify that for you, Eugene?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, I look at whether it's Steve Jobs at the time, Tim Cook now. You look at the leadership change at Apple. They've changed the entire exec team, bar a couple, from when Steve Jobs was there. And they're not bad executives. They've gone on to do some seriously great stuff at other companies. It's just that the next stage of Apple's journey is very different to the previous stages. Therefore, what got them there won't get them to where they need to be. Or more important, who got them there won't necessarily get them to the next stage. So it's not just the what, but it's the who. So does that nail that question for you?
It does. Thanks, Peter.
Wonderful. So what's the best practice for structure for regular one-on-one goal reviews? Well, if you take that a 13-week sprint is a 13-week sprint, every single week is an opportunity to move the dial on those goals. And I always say this, that when you're in a position of leadership and management, the biggest gift you can give people is your time. It's a bit like having children, really. The more time you get to spend with your kids in their formative years, the more that they learn, the more that they develop, the more that they're going to have a greater chance of success. Same with your people. If you actually love your people, you nurture your people, you work with them, and you actually mentor, guide, and coach them as to where they are with their goals. Are they on course? Are they behind? What do we need to do to help them win? Then you stand the best chance possible of hitting your goals. I personally think there needs to be a quality one-to-one every week with someone, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to give them too big of steps. So actually it feels like for them a mountain to climb. If you could actually break it down into weekly interactions that are actually meaningful, that it's helping them move forward and make the behavioral changes, the performance changes needed, that to me is best practice. And a lot of people say, well, I don't have the time. Well, you've got to make the time. What's the point of hiring people and having people report to you if you just hire them and leave them to it? That's madness. Make them brilliant. See, when you get to a leadership position, it's not how good you are anymore. If you're still stepping in and saving the day, then you're a poor manager. A sign of a great manager is not how great you are, it's how great you make your people. And that would be my answer to that one. I don't know if you've got anything to add on that.
I don't. Certainly, we have weekly one-on-ones with our staff. We, a weekly huddle, whether that be a weekly huddle that is for the leadership team getting together and discussing the priorities and the goals that have been established for the organization, or the same being a manager with a direct report, doing a weekly huddle and looking at that direct report's individual performance against the priorities that that employee is being held accountable for, as well as what action items and what tasks was that employee supposed to achieve in the past week, and did he or she achieve those tasks? And if they did not, sort of having a very frank conversation about what were the obstacles that you encountered, what were the challenges you faced, what can we as an organization do to help you achieve those goals and complete those tasks, so that by the end of the quarter, not only have you as an employee achieved your individual goals, but that's what's going to drive us as an organization achieving our higher level strategic priorities as well.
No, thank you, Eugene. That probably ties into the next question that I get asked a lot: team versus individual goals and alignment. And it's really simple. Let's just say whether it's a yearly goal, whether it's a quarterly goal, whenever you set a goal, you set a company goal. What does the company want to achieve during that period? So if it's a 13-week sprint, what do we want the company to achieve during that 13-week sprint? Now we've got the company goal, we look at the relative teams, because the company will have relevant departments, whether it's HR, finance, operations, marketing, sales, and actually ask the question, what does their contribution as teams need to be that will facilitate the company achieving its goals? I mean, at the end of the day, if the departments choose to work on something totally not related to that goal, that company goal, you've got to ask yourself the question, why would that be? Because is the company goal not important enough that we are going to divert our attention to achieving it? So it's getting everybody on that one page, everyone contributing, and then the people within the teams, their goals should be aligned with the team goals. So everyone's moving in one direction. That's our point around goal setting, that we've got the entire organization working with one another, moving in that one direction, not against each other. And that's probably what a lot of people have experienced in corporate, that everyone was looking at their own little silo and working in their own little silo. No, the purpose of goal setting is that we take the collective intelligence of an organization that's 10, 20, 30, 40, 100, 200, 300 people, and we get them moving in that one direction. Because imagine what you can achieve when you've got everybody aligned instead of people working in a disparate fashion.
Peter, I'm sure you know this. One of the perhaps lesser known features within the Align software is something called the alignment index. And what it does is it gives you a percentage of all of the priorities that have been created in the entire organization. What percentage of them actually associate or connect to a company priority? Meaning, of all of the work that's being done in the organization, how much of that work is actually has connective tissue to what we have said is the most important strategic work that we as an organization need to get done. So you want that number to be as high as possible. And similarly, there's a second value, that is what percentage of all priorities are just connected to any other priority, so that there's some connective tissue. And because if that number is low, that means you have individual employees that are doing things sort of out on the periphery that has absolutely no connection to either any other priority or, more importantly, a company priority in that quarter. So that raises sort of that question, why is that work being done if it doesn't tie in to something else that we've established as a critical goal or target for the organization?
And there will be some of those tasks may be needed because they're long-term projects that has its own strategic sort of thought process behind it. But a lot of the time, people are just, and I hate to say it, and I will say it, it's stupid shit, I'm afraid. It's stuff that people have dreamt up that they think is really high value. But actually, when you look at it, and especially when you use the index value, when you start looking at it, data doesn't lie. That's the one thing that I've learned. Data doesn't lie, and data gives you an indication of the trend. And if you're seeing people working on stuff that isn't important, you've got to stop it straight away, because it's costing the organization money. It's costing you money. And that's what we noticed when we had lockdown, and that word pivot, and I hate that word pivot with a passion. But a lot of companies that had to make that really quick pivot because their industry was decimated by lockdown, they needed everybody on the same page. Because if they couldn't get their entire teams on the same page in that singular direction, they were going broke. They were all going broke. And a lot of companies have gone broke because actually the company's siloed, there was infighting, there wasn't alignment. So it is critical to get a company alignment. And if you haven't got people that want to be aligned, as I said, you change a person or you change the person.
Peter, do you see the question that was posed by Scott? How do you get alignment on people that are just input-output workers? Scott has people who manufacture mortgage loans, so how does their work have enough discretion to feel engaged?
Now, what does that mean by manufacture mortgage loans? I just want to make sure that it's the same as what we've got in the UK. So are they the people that help house buyers get a mortgage? Would that be what they mean by manufacture loans?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Fantastic. So I've got a client who does just that. And really what we've done is we've made sure that it's about making sure that the people working in the organization believe that the work that they're doing is worthwhile work. So whether it's the mortgage broker that's actually selling the deal, or whether it's a customer relation team in the back office that processes the deal and makes sure that all the paperwork steps are completed, everyone knows within their respective teams what winning looks like, but more importantly, they're recompensed based on their performance. So those people that do a fantastic job, that put great deals through, that are likely to succeed and not fall through, they're based on that. We do not pay people that put bad deals through. So it's about educating the team. It's about getting the departments to work with one another. In fact, one of the great things that we've done is we've used themes within the business to turn it into a game. So people are having they're working towards that 13-week sprint, but more importantly, they're having some fun along the way. And there's also a reward to look forward to. And we celebrate big. So I'm not sure does that answer your question, Scott? I don't believe that there is sort of input output. There is the result. So the input and output, there is an end result that they're working towards. As long as we communicate what that is, and they know what that winning looks like, it's all great work. Great. Which actually leads into the next question I get asked a lot: how to tie incentives, compensation to goals. And I think I've kind of explained it just now, that really what we have to do is we have to clearly define what the goals are. And a lot of people will come and say, well, I want a salary, and they ask for a much higher salary. I'm not a big fan of paying people big base salaries. I'd much rather pay them a lower base salary, but actually not restrict their earnings. So they become like mini entrepreneurs in a business. And instead of them exchanging time for money, I would much rather reward them on value for money. The more value they bring to the organization, the better the results we get, the more we pay you. And that then says, okay, do you know what? I'm not working a 9 to 5 anymore. This becomes, I have skin in the game. So if I'm prepared to apply myself and achieve great results, then I would pay you more. And actually, why would I begrudge paying people more? And I'll give you an example with the mortgage loans. It's a great example, Scott. We're paying mortgage brokers north of £150,000 a year. Because actually, they're prepared to put the hard work in. They're prepared to go out there and bust their backside off. And especially like in those kind of environments, sales environments, they're very money driven. So they're prepared to go out there and apply themselves because they know that the more the work, the more effective they are. There's no restriction. There's no cap on their ability to earn. And that's exciting. And how can this apply to a finance team? Najesh, a really great example for you. What's the biggest challenge that most businesses have right now? Runway, cash runway. So finance team, yeah, you can make sure that the invoices are going out and stuff like that. I would measure, with a lot of my clients, we measure their performance based on how many days runway do we have as a business? Their job is to do everything possible to increase the runway of the business, whether that's credit control, whether that's looking at the margins, because if we're selling our services too cheaply and we're not getting the margins that we need, that's going to reduce our runway. Finance team can do so much and be bonused on so much. All we need to do is change the way we look at it. I mean, I really do wish that businesses take more time to think, how could every single department be challenged with critical numbers that they can drive, that they can be bonused on. And if you have read Scaling Up, great, Nijesh. If you haven't read Scaling Up, read Scaling Up. Because it is a fantastic book and it's about getting everybody winning, measuring everyone having their metrics and being rewarded for achievement. Is that clear? Good. You like the word runway. Fantastic. And that's just one example for a finance team. Then the next question I get asked a lot is promoting, terminating based on goal performance. Look, goal performance is the end result. I think what you've got to look at is the journey along the way, the journey they are taking on achieving those goals. And performance shouldn't just be around the ability to achieve the goal. You've got to look at, is the person in line with your core values? Are they an A-player employee? Are they able to grow with the business? There's a lot of different things. I mean, most companies really don't have a performance framework in their business. Now, if you're a smaller business, I always recommend the book Who by Jeff Smart. It's a fantastic book that gives you a framework to develop your team, but hold your team accountable. If you're a much bigger business that probably where Who is no, you've outgrown Who, I always love top grading. I always love top grading because that allows you to take your employees to the next level, but you've got to have a whole process around that. And the other thing is you've got to then be prepared when people do not make the grade. You've really got to be prepared to move people on. I see so many people wuss out of it. And it may not necessarily be the CEO that wusses out of it, but it's often the management team. The management team think of it as being a really bad thing, dealing with confrontation. Confrontation can be a positive thing. Moving people on can be such a positive experience for both parties. Doesn't have to be bad. Who says you have to sack someone in a nasty way? A lot of my clients don't fire people horribly. In fact, we don't fire them. We help them move on. We actually help them write their CV. We put them in contact with recruitment agencies. We hold their hand in the process until they've transitioned out of one business into another. Because we know they still can do a great job, just not necessarily where they are right now. Not because they've changed, but because the organization's changed. Because very often the organization changes and the rules change. And it's not them that's at fault at the end of the day. They were great people when we hired them. They were fantastic for that leg of the journey. The journey's changed. So,
Peter,
any question?
Peter, let me ask this question. What is the value in creating the goals with the employee rather than for the employee? Meaning, including the individual employee in the goal creation process?
I think it's very difficult. I think it depends on the level the goal's being set at. So when you're at board level, you're obviously going to have a very different level of A, education, B, frame of reference. Therefore, a strategic goal is going to be different to an execution goal. So I think strategic goals need to be set with the strategic team in mind, because they're the ones thinking at that level. And then you can take that goal, and if you're saying, well, how are we going to achieve that goal? And you bring it down to the management team. At that point, departments can bring in maybe team leaders to actually help brainstorm, well, this is the goal that we need to achieve. How are we going to do it? So I think there's two types of goal setting here. You've got the strategic goal setting and then the execution goal setting.
I'm referring to the execution goal setting. For example, if you're working with salespeople and you're setting quotas for them, is it a question of just setting a quota for the salesperson, or do you typically encourage your clients to speak with that salesperson and say, what do you think is a reasonable or aggressive goal for this next quarter? How much involvement do you suggest that leaders get from the actual employees when you are setting those execution goals?
I think it depends on the team and what level is the team. But look, if the strategic goal is this, then I would say that we don't say, okay, what do you think is a reasonable target? If this is a goal, we need to change the question. So if we're going back to the team, I don't say what is a reasonable goal. I will ask them the question, okay, this is what we have to achieve. How are we going to achieve it? Yeah, so what needs to happen for us to achieve this goal? That's where the debate comes. Because a lot of people don't believe that they can achieve what's out there. That's why they stretch goals. So it's actually getting them to think differently and saying, well, in order to achieve this goal, we may have to do something different. We may have to think differently. We may need to behave differently. The goal can be achieved because other people have achieved it. Therefore, we've got to work out, well, what needs to change with us to be able to do that.
Thank you. If you have questions for Peter, please go ahead and jot them in the chat. We'll certainly continue the conversation. Peter, you talked about team versus individual goals.
Yep.
Does that matter upon the size of the company? Because sometimes, given a small company, you may only have company goals and individual goals. You don't necessarily have that middle layer of team goals.
No, but I look at the people below. So if you don't have that layer, everybody in that organization is a team. If you've got an organization of 5 people, it just happens to be a team of 5 people. So let's make sure that those 5 people in that business are all moving in the same direction. That those 5 people are working with one another to achieve the goals.
Okay. Anyone else out there have any questions that they'd like to pose to Peter about how to use goal setting and goal management to handle performance management of individual employees or individual teams within an organization? Even perhaps examples within your own business of questions that you might have?
While we're waiting for questions to come in, one of the biggest challenges that organizations have is they don't clearly define their core values. Or if they do have their core values is tucked away on a piece of paper somewhere. Core values actually happens to be one of the best ways you can measure an employee. Because that's one of the biggest challenges, is that we don't get rid of people because of performance. Actually, we get rid of people very often because they violate core values.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
Jordan asked a question, do you believe in KPIs and scorecard posted? Absolutely. Peter Drucker said, what gets measured gets managed. Of course. Once we've got the stuff posted, once we understand what the numbers are, we can then have strategies in place to say, well, how do we improve upon this? And I'm a firm believer of marginal gains. How can we do that 0.1%, 0.1%, 0.1%, and improve it? Don't bother with the 10% at once, because that may be too much of a big stretch. Just a 0.1, 0.1, 0.1. Before you know it, those 0.1s soon add up. But you've got to have the something to measure in the first place. Otherwise, you don't know what you're improving. Hopefully that's answered your question, Jordan.
Peter, we have a question that was posed. Any thoughts or advice when the organization has outgrown an individual, but that person is within a year or 2 of retirement? That's a delicate one.
I would say you've got to move them on and help them find something they can do in the last few years. Now in the UK, I don't know what the law has changed so much around the world, but in the UK now, we don't have a retirement age. You cannot force someone to retire at 65 like it used to be. So the problem is people can stretch that. I think at the end of the day, this is where you've got to be totally honest. If we've outgrown that person, because all that's going to happen is that person's going to be able to compete less and less and less. And your A players in your organization are going to start resenting that person because they're not at the standard that everyone else is at. And before you know it, that person's going to be peer-to-peer victimized, and they're not going to be coming to work thinking, yay, I love this place. It's going to end up being that the place they loved is going to be the place they hate. That's the last thing you want them to remember by the time that they retire. That the last 2 years of my life in this organization was hell, because we did not have the courage to do right by that employee. And sometimes moving that employee on is doing right by that person. It's just too uncomfortable for us.
Peter, a question was posed for aggressive goals. When you've set aggressive goals for your team, do you have a recommendation of a book that might propose or show some emphatic language to support the team? Sort of the best way to share those goals and be more encouraging in terms of the language that you use.
Okay, for that, there's no book for that. At the end of the day, you've got to ask yourself the question, what does the manager or the leader need to learn? Because it's about how we communicate it. So you need to work out what the leader needs to learn and develop. Where does that need to, what transition does that person need to make to be better at communicating the goals? So I mean, you could read books on emotional intelligence. There's so many different books out there. I just think you need to work out what does that person, what's missing with that person. Again, if I was going to say what's a good book to read, probably Scaling Up, because it isn't language in, it's actually having the right framework in place. If you've actually got the right framework and everyone's working towards a framework, it makes communication a lot easier.
Thanks, Peter. Another question, how would, this Scott posed, how would you set goals for skills transference from a manager that we need to split into multiple people doing that job?
How would you set the goals for skills transference from a manager? So are we talking about that role becoming multi-person role?
Yes.
So as a business grows, we need another person to do a section of that job.
Correct.
Yeah, first thing as we scale, okay, Scott, the first thing I will do is I would always do a 1, 2, and 3 year organization chart in advance. So this year, what does that organization chart look like? December 2021. What does that organization look like 2022? What does that organization look like in 2023? First and foremost. Then I'd look at and really map out the positions, not the people. Then start putting people in the boxes, and that will give you where your gaps are. And then what I would say is you then hire for your gaps. Now you can look within the organization to see if you've got people that can step into that position, step up and step in. But if not, sometimes you're going to be better off saying, okay, these are the gaps we are missing. We're going on this journey. Who can we hire that's already been on that journey, that can bring their experience and expertise to our organization and speed things up? So I always start with the organization chart and map out the positions first. Then I look at, and especially when you're looking at hiring, Scott, you want people that are not on the bench. They need to be on your bench. You want people that are playing for another team. You want people that are actually currently being employed, that you're going to go get. They have a notice period that they have to serve, that they are leaving a job and it's a risk for them coming to you, as opposed to someone that's lost their job and they're just seeing you, oh, the job's come up, pick me. So that's what I would do. Hopefully that's answered the question, Scott.
Find out. There was a question posed by Hepson. Hepson, I'm going to ask you actually to ask the question yourself. I'm not sure that I understand it. So Hepson, I've allowed you to speak. Would you go ahead and ask the question?
Okay. Hi. Hi, Peter. My
Hello,
question is
Hepson.
that I have a client and there's an independent member in the board of directors, and he is very effective on strategic goal planning, but there is not an alignment with this member and the team. So I have some struggles about this team alignment and this strategic planning sessions and this member of the board. So what do you suggest about this? I mean, what do you think about this fact? That's my
How many
question.
people on the board? Hepson, how many people on the board?
There are 4 people in the board. They are all the family members, and 1 person is independent.
And it's the independent person. Why is the independent person on the board?
He has been on the board for 15 years, and the owner of the company wants him to be there in order to make them align in the meetings.
Okay, is the role clearly defined for that board member?
Yes, it seems so, but the company strategic goals, I mean, the way he thinks is not the same as the other members think. The way he thinks is not the same as the other members thinks. I mean, he's too fast and the others are not too fast. He is not, he wants everything to be done as very quick, but the others wants to examine and to make them, to make the other things slowly so that they cannot align. I mean,
Okay,
he makes pressure, you know, he makes pressure. So what do you think about these kinds of cases, you know?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, if at the end of the day, the team below need to be able to perform. So maybe the external sort of board member needs to slow down a little bit. But again, it's not his business. Therefore, at the end of the day, the business owner needs to set the goals. Where do they want to go? But at the same time, they need to be thinking, how can they step up their game? So be very careful that the external board member hasn't hijacked the business. That when we have non-exec directors sitting on a board, normally they're there to add value. They're there to sort of fill a skill that the business doesn't currently have. But with non-execs, they're meant to be the guide on the side. So they're meant to be guiding, not hijacking. So you need to just be careful that the board member isn't hijacking that business. Because ultimately, it's not their business.
Okay.
Thank you, Hepson.
Yeah, Hepson, that's a really good question though, Eugene, because a lot of people, especially external advisors, whether they're coaches, consultants, non-executive directors, I've seen it happen so often that they can go at a certain speed, therefore they expect everyone else to go at that speed, but it's no longer a corporate business anymore. They're now advising other businesses, and it's the other person's business. It's where that person wants to go, not where the non-execs want to go.
Peter, we had a question that was posed by Cornell, and it's kind of a broad overview topic of how do you suggest that a company cascade these organizational goals down to a team or to individual employee members?
Do you know, it's such a great question. Use a line. No, but seriously, I mean, look, you look at it. The reason I use a line with my clients is because it forces you to put your plan in a visible place. And then it forces you to then find a way of thinking, how do I cascade it down? Now, when you're talking about cascading it down, it's about using the right meeting rhythms within all your different departments. It's about getting the communication right. It's about getting the follow-up right. It's about making sure you've got the metrics in place and that you're moving the metrics. It's about saying, okay, well, how frequently do we need to measure this? In manufacturing, You could be measuring those metrics on an hourly basis. It all depends. It's just working out what the right cadence is for your business. But that could be an entire webinar topic on its own. Seriously, it could be. And listen, if you need more information about it, reach out to Eugene. You can always reach out to me. I'm quite happy to help where I can. But it's you're not going to get a 2-minute answer. But if you wanted a really quick answer, it's going to be use a system like Align.
Thank you, Peter. Anybody have any other questions? Please go ahead and use the chat. We have just a few minutes before the top of the hour, and I know everyone's time is valuable. So if anybody has any last minute questions, please pose them now. It looks as though perhaps we have answered all of the questions that everybody had this morning. I sincerely want to thank everyone for attending today's coach webinar. Obviously, a huge thank you to Peter for a great presentation. You can learn more about him at his website, boolkah.com. That's Boolkah, boolkah.com. If any of you have any questions about how to use the Align or the other family of software tools, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can always reach us at support@aligntoday.com. Thank you. Just checking, no other questions. Made sure we didn't have any other questions come in. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you will, of course, join us again for our next coach webinar in March. More detailed information about that will be provided in the coming days, and we hope you'll join us. Till then, we hope that you have a great day, a great rest of the week, and please, everyone, stay healthy and safe. Peter, thanks so much for your time, and always great getting your wisdom and insight.
Thank you for having me, and take care, everyone. Thank you for joining today.
Have a great one. Thanks, Peter.
Take care. Bye-bye.